If government looked after manufacturing in the same way they look after our primary industries, we would have a much more broadly based economy. And, if you want to develop jobs in the regions, then manufacturing is the key opportunity.
Kia ora, I'm Troy, HERA CEO, and welcome to Stirring the Pot. Thanks for connecting. If you're new, here's what you can expect. We're going to be talking the tough stuff, the things that keep us metalheads up at night. There are many challenges facing our industry and equally many opinions on how we should tackle them. Stirring the Pot provides a facilitated forum to discuss and challenge these viewpoints.
So let's get to the nuts and bolts of it. Hi, I'm Tristram Clayton, and I'm happy to facilitate today's conversation with Metals NZ Chief Executive Nick Collins, SCNZ Manager Darren O'Reilly, and a familiar Stirring the Pot voice, HERA CEO Troy Coyle. Without a doubt, many of those in the New Zealand metals industry will have heard of HERA, Metals NZ and SCNZ. But what you might not be 100% clear on is what they're about, their key strategic focuses and how they collaborate. Today, let's make that clear. Welcome all. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Let's start at the beginning and go through each of your organisations to find out what your key remit is and what is and are your unique focus activities. So let's start with you, Troy.
So I'm Troy, the CEO of HERA, and our remit is really to provide the R&D expertise and training to help the industry innovate.
All right. Nick, should we carry on with you?
Happy with that. Hi, I'm Nick Collins, CE of Metals New Zealand. Metals New Zealand is a bit of a unique beast. It's a pan-industry organisation. We and our members are the 7 member organisations across the sector, so SCNZ and HERA, along with New Zealand metal roofing manufacturers, New Zealand Stainless Steel Development Association, Casting Technology, Galvanising Technology, I think I've got them all, I might have missed one, and NASH, which is the National Association of Steel Frame Housing.
So you're the body that represents all those organisations, of which these two are two of them. So let's finish off with you, Darren. Tell us about your organisation and your role within it.
Hi, I'm Darren. I'm the manager of Steel Construction New Zealand. So we're the voice of New Zealand's rather diverse structural steel market. So our remit is to grow structural steel and its use in the New Zealand construction market.
All right, clearly there is quite a bit of overlap there, and that has created some confusion in the past. Tell us about where are the overlaps and where are you specifically have the different functions and different roles within the metals industry?
Well, probably there's a bit of confusion because SCNZ grew out of HERA. We were originally a department of HERA, but we've been on our own now since 2006. So SCNZ's quite focused on the structural steel market itself, which is a subset of what HERA does and or some of the many markets that HERA looks after. And what we're about is the here and now. So we're about servicing the market, trying to grow structural steel against our competitors, and that's concrete and timber as a material, and also overseas structural steel that's important to the country. So we're about looking after our members' needs today and maybe in the next couple of years, whereas HERA is about looking for the 5 years, 10 years and beyond.
And we'll get that from Troy in a second, but just tell us a little bit more about, you said you grew out of HERA. What was the push and the drive, the motivation for you effectively going it alone, coming out of HERA in that way?
Well, it was before my time, but I think the general driver was that we have to be quite specific and do some quite direct market-focused activities, whereas HERA is limited by its scope to research and innovation, which it clearly does very well, where we are more out and servicing our members' needs on the day-to-day basis.
All right, Troy, well, Darren touched on there. Let's get the full brief, exactly what your key roles and your key focus as well.
Yes, I think Darren's right. HERA would be very much the future-focused organisation, so ensuring that our industry is prepared for transformation and disruption and innovation moving forward in the short term as well as the long term. Maybe what has constrained us in terms of our remit is that we are governed by a piece of legislation, the Heavy Engineering Research Levy Act, and that doesn't allow us to do too much advocacy. And so that's why, for example, other organisations have been created, which Nick will tell you about. And we're very much focused on the research and development and the expertise and the training around that to enable industry to adopt the outcomes of that information as well.
So that's quite big picture stuff there. Obviously, steel will be a key component of that, but you represent all metals when it comes to both innovation and some of those other issues you mentioned.
Yes, in theory, but because the levy is predominantly coming in from steel, we're very much heavy steel focused, but we don't look just at building and construction. So we look at other applications of steel as well, for example, in manufacturing and pressure vessels.
All right, Nick, so flowing on to you now. I heard that the key point there seemed to be advocacy. Is it fair to say that is one of your big roles?
That's one of our big roles, but once again, like SCNZ, metals grew from HERA's activities, and my understanding, so I wasn't there at the time, was it wasn't in that gap around advocacy and addressing particularly issues that concern the sector that are larger than any one of the individual member organisations. So out of that, for metals, has grown a program of work partly focused on government, which is around government procurement, fair and free trade, and non-conforming products, which are a challenge for all of those member groups that I mentioned and also the other key organisations in the metal sector. And outside of government, we've got three other priorities around sustainability, productivity, and collaborative research initiatives across the sector involving those member organisations and other key entities in the sector.
It all makes a lot of sense when you describe the origins of the organisations and where they've come from. But you can see how within the public's mind and some of the industry, but also within the media, there can be a bit of confusion about who represents what. Is that an issue you come up against?
No, it's not an issue I come up against. And for metals, the remit's almost a little bit further than what we've talked about, because we also represent a group of aluminium extruders who have some issues that are common with the rest of the metal sector, particularly around free trade, around non-conforming product and around government procurement. And then across the steel sector that has since probably about 2008, 2009, a focus around sustainability, and out of that, fostered once again by HERA, was the Sustainable Steel Council. And that is, I suppose, housed within metals, but the key participants are those metals organisations that I mentioned, and also the key players like New Zealand Steel and Steel and Tube and Fletchers and others. So, I don't kind of see the confusion in the same way, and I think the three of us communicate pretty openly and freely about what's going on, and sometimes it's around shared issues, and Troy and I were talking this morning about government procurement, and sometimes it's around issues that concern me, that I need input from them or I need a sounding board. So I don't see the confusion from where I sit, because these two are just kind of two of the brotherhood of 7 organisations.
Makes sense, and obviously clearly working and cooperating together. How about you, Troy? Obviously these other two organisations grew out of HERA. Do you find that occasionally either the media or industry players come to you with questions that are relevant to the other organisations?
I don't see it as a brotherhood, I see it as a sisterhood, and I think that we really work so closely, and I think it's facilitated by all being physically located, within arm's reach, basically. So I don't see any problems. If there is confusion, they're kind of dealt with in the same way that if media were speaking with a department within the same organisation.
Very, very well put. Let's talk about the cooperation working together and the fact that you're all, I think you just mentioned in your intros, they're all quite new, relatively new within your roles. How's that changed things compared to how the organisations were to where they are now and where you want them to go? Should we start with you, Darren?
Well, I'd like to add, I think it's a neighbourhood on the Manordora. But
yes,
awesome.
Yeah. So I think prior to Troy's arrival, there was a bit of maybe Metals and SCNZ was seen as the apprentice of the master, and sometimes when the predecessors of Troy spoke, they spoke on our behalf as opposed to giving our own voice, which I certainly think we have now. So that's been a big change and a big benefit. I think we're quite clear amongst ourselves on where we stand and where we need to combine and where we need to go separate in some cases. But I think a major change has been that we are now trying to educate the market on those differences, where we knew internally quite well, but we weren't so great at going externally to communicate that. Our industry and our community is quite a small community, so people will pick up the phone and ring the person they've last dealt with, and that might have been HERA 10 years ago, and it might be Metals 2 years ago or SCNZ last week. So we're now trying to get those clear demarcations to the industry, but also working amongst ourselves where we need to.
And obviously even a discussion like this is helping get that message out there pretty clearly. Tell us about the relative size of all your organisations to each other, and what are you gaining in staff, or is it pretty static? How's that working?
Well, we're only a small organisation. We have 4 full-time staff and 2 contractors, arguably 3 contractors actually now, and but our membership's over 400, and that's a diverse membership from steel, what's called a steel fabricator, but the right terminology is steel constructor, so they're the people who manufacture and erect structural steel, right through to engineers, the flooring manufacturers, the steel detailers. So it's quite a diverse market. But most of our membership are also in turn members of HERA.
And that's a large membership. How does that work for you, Troy, based your organisation, but then also the member side of it?
So we, I think, are about 13 people at any one time, and then we have interns and students coming through. But in terms of membership, we're about 630 at the moment, and as Darren said, covers a lot of the SCNZ membership, but we've got probably some additionals in terms of associate membership from universities, some government departments, affiliated organisations, design engineers, and yes, fabricators and constructors.
And Darren's mentioning getting that message out there of the different organisations' role. Are you happy, especially since you took over, are you happy that message is getting out there to those relevant parties?
Yeah, because I think it actually dilutes the HERA brand just as it would dilute the SCNZ brand. So I want us to be very clear on what we stand for, and it's really around the innovation side of things.
Nick, obviously it's a bit different with you, but you just represent other organisations. But tell us about how many people in your organisation and the sort of the growth of membership and the size of your staffing.
So size of the staffing, quite limited. It's me, so I'm it. But having said that, we get a lot of support from HERA for some of the activities we do, and more recently from Steel Construction New Zealand, who provides support services to the Sustainable Steel Council. And we have some outside contracting support, but other than that, it's me, with the support from the team.
Again, I'm sensing a great deal of cooperation here. What's the sort of vibe of your organisation? How do you want to be perceived? What's the goal here?
That's an interesting question. Because it is about the future sustainability, profitability of our sector. And, from a personal perspective, I think officials and ministers have a very limited understanding of the role of the metal sector, and particularly metals manufacturing. And the contribution that has to the economy, to our GDP. So as a sector, we employ over 30,000 people in manufacturing alone. So that doesn't include the construction side of things, and manufacturing contributes about, it's about 1%, I think, of GDP. So, but if government looked after manufacturing in the same way they look after our primary industries, we would have a much more broadly based economy. And, if you want to develop jobs in the regions, then manufacturing is the key opportunity. Yeah.
A lot of key statements there and some big numbers. Darren, I saw you nodding your head. What did you want to add to that?
Oh, I think Nick's 100%. We've been a primary industries country, and a lot of our government legislation's been involved around that, and manufacturing and the construction industry often gets left outside that. So I think there's now, it's our duty to try and be change makers on that. And I think there has been some willingness by the government to listen, and that's thanks to some of the stuff work that we've done.
Have you noticed that as well, Troy?
I think there is a bit of a focus from government on the primary industries still, and particularly on regional development. And I think it was a really interesting fact that came out of the MB manufacturing report in 2018 that actually the metals industry is a regional industry. All of the growth that's happening in metals manufacturing is actually happening in the regions. So I think we've got a bit to do to tell our story a little bit better, but definitely the data there is to support us in doing that.
Can I just add to that? Because if that report also talked about, the value of wages, and most of our jobs in manufacturing, and particularly metals manufacturing, are high-wage jobs. Traditionally, in the last decade, government has focused on tourism, horticulture, agriculture, all low-wage economy jobs.
All right, well, that's probably a nice moment to talk a little bit about the future. Obviously, the big point being threats and opportunities. So much going on within your sector, with acquiring talent, green reboots, IT, blockchain. So much going on. Can I ask each individually, where do you see the biggest threats and also the biggest opportunities? Should we start with you, Nick?
So I think the biggest threat is short-sightedness, and so if we look at kind of sustainability, and the perception of our sector is that it's a high energy, high emission sector, and a naive belief by some that we can transition to a low emission economy without metals. And your love of coffee, you're just going to have to accept that if we haven't got metal, it'll be quite difficult. You ride a push bike, carbon fibre maybe, the train, the bus, the motor car, the infrastructure that supports it. And in that transition to low emission economy, whether it be geothermal, whether it be wind power, we're going to struggle to do that without metals. And also, if you look at the progress that's been made, particularly the reduction of fossil fuel use in the transport sector, enormous reduction because of the more optimised use of higher quality metals. So that's the biggest threat I see, is naivety and stupidity. The biggest opportunity I see is in manufacturing, and whether that be the sort of high-value manufacturing we see coming out of our casting businesses, where most of what they produce they export, and high-value castings, often from low-grade metal and often from scrap metal. The opportunity in the construction sector to really improve productivity through off-site manufacture, and what all of our metals offer is, firstly, exacting dimensions. They don't wander like natural materials do, but also the infinite reuse. I mean, metals are at the heart of a circular economy in terms of repurposing the metal at the end of its life, reuse, or finally recycling.
Obviously, a lovely crossover into your organisation, Troy, a primary objective being innovation. How would you respond to those same points?
Well, actually, we surveyed our members last year on exactly this question, and what they came back with was prefabrication being their major concern as a potential disruptor. And I guess for us, prefabricated items of heavy steel coming into the country is a big threat, a big potential threat. And we do need to look at the quality aspects of that, as well as the lack of use of local manufacturing and fabrication capability that gets missed out if it isn't given that opportunity. I think for me, the biggest threat is disruption, just more generically, and our industry's preparedness for disruption, or even its visibility of what's on the horizon in terms of manufacturing technologies or new materials or hybrid uses of metals with other materials, and how our industry is preparing itself for those opportunities. I also think that there is a potential risk around the social license to operate for metals and how they're perceived environmentally, and we do need to be seen to be taking a leadership role there.
Can you offer up any concrete examples of how you are going to deal with some of those issues moving forward? You've obviously been thinking about it. Have you got a bit of a strategy along that line?
Well, we have reinvigorated the Sustainable Steel Council, and that council's first project is really to have a strategy session around that particular issue. We are also conducting through HERA a general market research study of how a metal is perceived by the general community and what are their perceptions around the benefits and costs of steel to the corporate and social arenas. We have also conducted a study, in fact we were the first industry to do so, using Treasury's For Capital's framework to assess our financial contribution to the nation, and that really does look at the other aspects that this government's quite interested in looking at around the social and the natural capital issues as well. So we have been thinking about it, and we've just started to prepare ourselves for how we're going to present the benefits of steel in that regard.
Right, well, obviously lots of questions here for you, Darren. But just before we move on to you and specifically threats and opportunities in the steel-specific industry, you did mention the Sustainable Steel Council. Well, where does that fit in exactly?
So it's really initially was a initiative of HERA, but really operated through Metals New Zealand, and we've always been strong supporters, SCNZ and HERA, but really Nick's leading it, so hand over to Nick here.
Yeah, so the Sustainable Steel Council was an initiative probably in about 2008 that beyond 2013 didn't progress because with the then administration that we had, there was really no interest in sustainability in the built environment. And we last year started around about August to put some life back into it. So Troy has some really strong drivers around sustainability, and I've worked in that space before, so it was a kind of it was a natural step for us to be taking as a sector, because I think both of us fundamentally believe that there's a lot of progress that we can make. And I've already pointed out in that transition to a low-carbon future that metals are a key component of it. But I think in the way we live our lives, and more importantly, what we leave for our children, it's really important that all sectors of the economy start to address some of the fundamental issues with the way we consume.
All right, so much to talk about there with you, Darren. Okay, well, let's go back. So we've got threats, opportunities, but also sustainability. Give us your take on this.
Well, look, I'll sum it up by saying, to start off, that we're unashamedly a New Zealand manufacturing association. So we rely on Metals New Zealand when we have advocacy that represents the entire industry. We do our own advocacy where it's quite specific to the structural steel industry. So as a result, sustainability affects the entire metals industry. So we're a key participant of the Sustainable Steel Council. As such, we support where Nick's taking that direction. So for us, and it probably links into where we see HERA. HERA is a great brand name to have behind us when it comes to justifying our positions on certain statements. As I say, we are biased towards New Zealand manufacturing. HERA is seen as a very well respected, and it is, research association and innovator. So we can use their name to support some of our stuff that we do. So that leads me into what our threats and issues are. It's mainly around that compliance and the quality. Now, we're in an open market and there's free trade throughout the world, but all things aren't equal. And there's been a number of materials, particularly around the structural steel, electrical wiring, glass, have come into New Zealand from offshore, which isn't compliant. And we're now finding out that there's some risks and some consequences of that. So what we're trying to do as an industry is we just can't say, hey, we're New Zealanders and we've been around for a long time, so rely on us. We've got to get our own act together, and we've also got to ensure that the local authorities and the government realise that put us on the same level playing field. So if we're expected to meet certain quality requirements, certain compliance requirements, make sure everybody is, and let us compete as on contracts based on the merits of that. So a number of things going around there. So our industry's invested heavily in technology themselves, be it 3D printing, through CNC machinery. So our support of that is minimal. That's what they do as individual businesses. Where we come in is we've brought our own quality assurance program in, and we've done that working very closely with HERA, and that's called Steel Fabrication Certification, SFC. So that's now become a very recognised quality assurance system for the manufacture of structural steel. We couldn't have done it without HERA, and HERA's got a company called HERA Certification, which is the independent auditing body of that program. So we promote it. HERA Certification does the hard work of auditing and making sure people meet the requirements.
It's fascinating. It almost comes back to some of those issues we were talking about at the beginning. That's that cooperation where it really does work, because you've got your own role for advocacy, but then when you want to have a little bit stand back, you tie in with HERA, for example.
Correct. It's correct. So we can't have it saying, well, it's a club. It's not a club, the SFC. It's now it's a requirement by 2020 that all our steel fabricators have to have SFC. So having HERA on the background to be able to develop those tools that we need for that has been outstanding. So in terms of compliance, that's about ensuring that steel fabricated steel brought into New Zealand complies with our very good standards we have in New Zealand, that it's manufactured correctly. So we've been working with councils, working with HERA, working with the government, and we've put together quite a bit of literature and programs and matrices to ensure that when people are specifying structural steel in buildings, it's going to comply.
Are you fairly happy with the breakdown of the different organisations and the cooperation? Do you think you've got it about right? I'll ask this question to all of you. But with the number of bodies there are, it is about right. Are you happy with the mix?
I think we work very well together. We do communicate across, and sometimes things slip through the cracks, very few. And that's just because we're all busy people. But I think we've all got the same end goal, and we're all going along the same path, and sometimes we fall off that path, but I think generally we are in the right place, and I think our members understand that now. I think it's helped that we've been 3 new leaders of each of the organisations who don't come with any baggage, and I think we're all going forward together, and we've got good teams underneath us who work well together as well.
Nick, if we come back to Metals New Zealand, obviously representing so many different organisations, is that a fair assessment of the situation as you see it?
I think so. The only gaps I see relate to our smaller organisations. So, HERA, SCNZ, metal roofing manufacturers, all well resourced to service their members. The smaller member organisations struggle. And I think that's a challenge that Metals has to respond to in terms of how we just support them to be able to provide the resource that's necessary. And I think, if you look at the SCNZ model, the way they have serviced their market of structural engineers, the technical support is really, has borne fruit in what gets built. And likewise, we need a strong sector right the way across. And how do we ensure that there is good technical support around all of the metal solutions? That's the challenge.
Nice, lovely answer. And we could finish with you, Troy, as the sort of, you're looking at your other sister organisations. Are you pretty happy with your place, and where do you want to make changes in the future?
I think it all works because we're all working towards a bigger picture, which is really a sustainable industry. And so HERA's remit to focus on innovation, it's not going to really work if we don't have government support, and we need that advocacy support. And at the same time, it's not going to work if we don't have quality fabricators and fabricators who are actually using the right design standards and so on. So I think in the big picture, it's in all of the best interests of our individual organisations to work collaboratively. So I think we work really well together. And I think even just listening to people's answers, we can all talk about each other's organisations with great familiarity without getting stepping on anyone's toes either. So I think that's a good sign.
Darren, Troy, Nick, thank you for coming on Stirring the Pot. It's been fascinating talking with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.